So now we can get to the heart of the discussion. Is Zach a Randian? I've answered no, but you can definitely see aspects of Rand in his work. So how does this jive with his canon as well as what he's trying to say in these films? Well, to be fair, again, Zach has emphasized he's a Randian in terms of the aesthetics. There definitely is a kind of fetish he has for the human body. We see these very powerful men and powerful women with huge muscles and incredibly strong builds. And we see that very much focused on in poses over and over again in the various films. But I think we want to be careful because not every person fits this kind of Randian ideal of a Ubermensch with incredible strong muscles and a huge, nice build and an athletic cast, right? Rorschach has a much more common average body. And if we see Justice League, we see body types of all kinds. We don't just this one physical type. But there definitely is this focus on the human body being perfect or nearing perfection, and there is that. And that does have a kind of alarming parallel in neo-fascism, right, where fascists often were trying to idealize the human body. That's not just true of fascism. There's many places where we can see that kind of fetish of the human body. So we have to go a little bit beyond that. People say, the heroes don't act heroic, and not at least in the classical DC and Marvel sense of the 1960s and early 70s. And that is true, right? We don't see the heroes smiling a lot. They seem very reluctant to do what they're doing. They question their own motives. They don't seem to like people very much, and so on and so forth. So they seem to have a very negative or pessimistic attitude towards the masses. And that fits Rand, right? Because she's a very pro-elitist writer, and she only believes that the extraordinary people deserve to live and thrive. Everyone else really should be denigrated, and they don't deserve our time or place. Nevertheless, I don't think this fits Rand completely because although the altruism is a little strange, especially with Batman, at least at times Batman in BVS as well as Justice League feels a little bit more like he's doing more harm than good. So you sort of think to yourself, well, is this really the classical Batman hero? And the answer is no, but he is an altruist. He's a very strange kind of altruist in the way he tries to help people, but he does try to help people, and we do see this clearly over and over again. Cyborg helps people. The Flash saves people, but they don't save people in the classical sense. He is moving away from that classical image we had in the 60s and early 70s. But I think people forget how radically comic books did change in the mid 70s. We had characters going through drug addiction in the 70s. We had them confront race riots, imperialism, and so on and so forth. They saw internal corruption after Watergate in Vietnam. So I think people sort of seeing things are not really situating these things correctly in the time period. There was a deconstruction of heroes that predated the 1980s. There was already a lot of influence of adult themes coming in the middle into late 70s, and that predates Snyder by quite a lot. And it totally goes against what Rand wants to think is appropriate in any format. She made very clear she didn't think that good people should be portrayed evil, right, because there was only one kind of good, namely the objectivist kind of good. And she also didn't like the idea that evil would be portrayed as in a good or at least inspiring fashion. And we do see in the film Watchmen that the heroes do evil things, and yet somehow we should see from their perspective that perhaps they had no choice, perhaps it was the right thing at that moment, and so on and so forth. So again, I think Snyder is complicating what we think of good and evil, but he's not being as radical as people say he is, because as far as I understand it, in the graphic novel Watchmen, we're not seeing any heroes at all. They're all not heroes to some extent. But Snyder does clearly try to frame Rorschach as somewhat heroic, even if we see his actions are incredibly brutal. I think he's trying to chart a middle course between Alan Moore and Rand. And Alan Moore is on record. He does not like Rand. He doesn't really respect Rand. He thinks Rand is an idiot. And Rorschach, in many ways, is a parody of her ideals. It's not a fulfillment. So I think he's being a lot more moderate, and we do have a little bit of confirmation from Chris Terrio, who was his co-screenwriter for BVS as well as Justice League, that Batman's story seems a little strange in BVS, but it is a redemption story. Yes, we do see kind of this very extremely dark Batman in the beginning and middle sections, but by the end, he's moving away from that. And with Justice League, we see over and over again, he's trying to be contrite. Superman was a threat, and he changes his mind that Superman is actually an inspiring symbol and that they need him, not necessarily for his power, because of what he represents to humanity. That's why they need Superman to return. So this is a very different Batman that we get from BVS. And again, that was all laid out, but that because of studio interference, they just wanted to more focus on the fight sequences and things like that. But the actual character pivoting and moving towards redemption was really cut out or truncated. I can understand just looking at the theatrical release or just looking at it and not paying attention that Batman just seems like murderous and brutal and vengeful, and that's it. But if you pay attention to the film, we do move from him going from vengeance to forgiveness. And in that respect, it's kind of been misconstrued as all that Zack is doing is deconstruction. There is a lot of deconstruction going on, but there's also reconstructing the heroic ideal, but just in a new way. And I guess it's just the way he visualizes these things. He lingers on the collateral damage and buildings falling, that people might assume that, well, there's an obvious through line from Rand, right? Because the Fountainhead has the, quote, hero destroy his own building, and that's what he's doing here. He's just focused on the destruction of this old society, which is corrupt and decadent and disgusting, and paving the way for a new Randian utopia. But that's just not what we see. We see very altruistic heroes, but with mixed motives, and they're trying to do the best they can, working with civilians, but also they do follow their own kind of selfish ideals, and there's a kind of mixture back and forth. So there are Randian aspects, especially in terms of how things are visualized with the human body, but when we go beyond the human body in terms of how people interact with other characters, we're getting a very not Randian aesthetic completely, where people do want to be altruistic. They may be altruistic in a weird fashion or in a way that's not common in many comic book films, but it's there. And although he frames it in a very strange fashion or paradoxical fashion, it's not a self-contradiction, because we do see Batman and the other characters shift. The shift may have been a little bit minuscule for some people, but it is there and you can track it. It's just you have to be paying close attention to the text. I don't think we can say he's just Randian without qualification. There's definitely a Randian aspect, but it's playing with this kind of deconstruction of comic books that has been going on for decades and long predates his career as a filmmaker. All right, this has been part one of Is Zack Snyder a Randian? Yes or no? Thank you for listening.